I'm Jodie.
And I'm Kat.
And you're listening to Felons and Families. All right, well, welcome back to Felons and Families. So before we dive into our topic today, I wanted to double back to episode 5, where we talked about the myths surrounding public defenders. We talked about hiring attorneys and how to get information about their track record and expertise in certain areas of the law. So we did the research as we promised. Want to just put out some information about that. So this is when you're trying to hire an attorney or you're trying to get an understanding if before you hire that attorney, if they're being honest about, as Kat, you had a situation, remember that...
the lawyer was not fluent in the area of law that I needed him to be.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can, first thing that's recommended is that you go on their website and see what case results they put up on their website. Mm-hmm. An app that's AVO, that's Apple, Victor, Ocean, provides independent ratings and reviews for attorneys.
Oh, wow.
The Bar Association, you can go on there to see if there's any violations against an attorney.
Oh, that's really helpful.
It was also recommended that when you interview the lawyer, ask him about specific cases. They should be able to give you even case name that you can go look it up yourself. So like San Bernardino Courthouse. Mm-hmm. And you can go right online and look up a case yourself and see what the results were, see if he was really the attorney on the case. Oh. Unless, I would imagine, if the case was sealed, you might not be able to see the information posted. In federal, they have a system called PACER, which is P as in Paul, A as in Apple, C as in Charlie, E as in Edward, R as in Railroad, PACER. And it's also another public site that you can go on to look up a federal case. Again, unless the case is sealed, then you're not going to be able to look it up.
Very resourceful.
You can go to the attorney's social media, like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, just to see how they're presenting themselves. And lastly, lawhelp.org focuses on helping low-income individuals find an attorney. So that's the research that we have that we promised.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all your dedication to the topic.
All right, so now our topic today is substance use and abuse and the role that it plays while on supervision. This will not be the only episode in which we talk about substance abuse. We have some people that we want to interview, talk about their experience moving forward, but today is just getting started on this topic.
Wonderful.
All right, so in the beginning of a case, we have to learn something about a person, right? Because how does law enforcement, how does the court ultimately know that a person has a substance abuse problem? Because not always, a person is not generally arrested because of the use, they're arrested because of what they have on them or the crime that they committed. And through that process, they learn that person has a substance abuse problem. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of want to explain how the process works and how that information gets derived. So a person gets arrested or they get indicted. Now, right there, they could have the information because they could be under the influence. They could have had drugs on them or it was found at the home, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that's not the case. There's no knowledge yet. And the person, oftentimes, if they're not in custody, will be on pretrial. And in pretrial, that's a system where, okay, we're innocent so far because you haven't pled guilty yet or you haven't been found guilty. So we're going to let you stay out of custody while you're pending your case. And we're going to put certain conditions on you that you have to follow in order to stay out of custody. And in that, there might be drug testing conditions. Mm-hmm. And then during that course of drug testing, they test positive, so we learn the information that you're using. So it's either learned there or at some point, you're going to, before you get sentenced, so now you're found guilty, and before you get sentenced, most of the time, not all the time, the court will order what's called a pre-sentence report.
And what's that?
Yeah, so that's when a probation officer takes a look at everything about your case, everything about your life, your children, where you were born. They'll interview your parents, your significant other, and they compile all this information about you. And for purposes of today, they're going to ask about substance abuse, mm-hmm. substance use. They're going to ask your mom, they're going to ask your dad, maybe brothers, and you. Mm-hmm. Now, public defenders, well, any attorney, any defense attorney, is going to ask the question as well. Because if you disclose that you do use or abuse drugs, the court can then order or refer the Bureau of Prisons to put them in what's called RDAP. It's a drug program that lasts a year while you're in custody. And if you get accepted into the program and you complete the program, then you get some time shaved off of your sentence.
Yeah, that happens not just in federal court, but I think across all different types of court. I know that it's been a benefit to me, maybe not that exact program, but a rehab program to defer jail time or lessen charges.
Right. Where that can become a problem for some people is if they lie. So because there's an incentive, sometimes people don't have a drug use problem, but they say they do.
I could see how that might create some problems in their future.
Yeah, because they're sitting there thinking, well, I'm going to be in prison anyway. What do I care if I go to some drug programs, right? But once they get out, those conditions are there. And it's a matter of fact, because once you agree and approve that pre-sentence report, it is now a part of your file. And I'd get people coming out going, I don't really have a drug problem. I just said that to get into the program so I could get time off my sentence. Well, you're stuck with it now.
Yeah. Enjoy testing every day or, a couple times a month.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's enough from that. That's a caution, just being cautionary there to let people know, maybe tell the truth about their drug use. At any rate, so now it's understood, it's recognized that you have this drug abuse issue. And when you get out, you have these conditions. Well, what's supposed to happen, but not every officer does this, going back to episode 1, okay? What you're supposed to do is take a look at the person as a whole and ask yourself, well, did they complete the 1-year program in custody? Did they have any problems with use in custody? Did they get any infractions or in trouble at all? If they were in a halfway house prior to their release to you, which a halfway house is just a place that people go before their sentence ends that allows them to start integrating into the community.
Yeah, like a sober living or...
Yeah, similar.
Kind of.
We'll go into more detail on a different episode about halfway houses, but during that course of that process, during the halfway house, they're often in a program as well. So they've programmed in custody, they've programmed in the halfway house, they've drug tested for the halfway house. It's all been negative. The program's been testing them. All the tests have been negative. And I'm supposed to recognize that, all this work this person has done. They come out, I drug test them initially, it's negative. And maybe I don't put them in treatment. Maybe I just keep them randomly tested for a while to see if this newfound freedom hasn't gotten a hold of them and they haven't relapsed.
Yeah.
But what a lot of officers do, and I don't know if it's based on laziness or if it's based on just a mere attitude that I've got these conditions and I'm going to put you in, they'll just make you do all the programs. They'll make you go into the program.
Yeah, I've had to jump through all the hoops.
Right. And as you know, there's levels of programs. There's outpatient, there's inpatient, there's AA meetings, there's all these things. But so a lot of officers will just put them in an outpatient program because they don't want to have to later write a letter to the court asking the court to suspend treatment. Okay. So if that happens and you don't feel like you're having a use problem, there's really nothing you can do about it. It's up to the officer.
Yeah, that's just, back to a previous episode. Sometimes it's just better to buckle down and do what the courts ask you to make your life easier and to get the outcome that you desire, which is to be released from supervision.
Right. So then the trick is make sure you're showing up. Don't miss any tests. Don't ask questions about why do I have to be in this program when I've done all this other work.
Yeah.
You can ask, but all that's going to do is pique the interest in the officer. The officer's going to think, why are you pushing back? And they're just going to refer to the fact that there's court orders.
Yeah, just do the program.
Just do the program. Hopefully they'll take you out. It's a waste of resources, really. You're just draining resources by having somebody in programming that doesn't need it.
Yeah, and there's a lot. There's a big wait in a lot of places to get treatment, and having somebody there that doesn't need it is taking up somebody else's spot that truly needs to be there.
Yeah. Where things got frustrating for me is you would have your obvious meth addict, the person who's just not even functioning at all. And that has to get addressed. And some people want to ask, they'll ask me why. Why does probation have to be so involved in the drug part of things? People are going back to custody for use. That's a waste of resources too. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But The reason is because of risk, because oftentimes you committed that crime because of your drug use.
Yeah.
So like identity theft always seemed to go with meth.
Yeah.
If I had a person, if I got called by law enforcement saying, hey, we're looking into your girl for identity theft, I know immediately I should test her.
Yeah.
And she's going to test positive for meth.
Yeah.
And so officers have to weigh that risk, because if we don't, then we could be considered liable for allowing a person to be out on the streets using and having no accountability for it. So it's this weighing that the officers are doing.
You know, it's so funny that now drug use is not accepted, but understood more than it was 20, 30 years ago while under supervision. When my ex was on supervision, if he was going to test dirty, he wouldn't report. He would make excuses, because back then, if you gave your PO one dirty test, you went straight back to prison for at least 30 days. And my understanding is now it seems like they want to help the addict get clean, get better.
Yeah, I think that there definitely was a shift at some point in the years that I was doing this. I would agree that we were being a little more swift on getting people back into custody when use began. But at some point it became clear that we had to try to rehabilitate. We had to try to help and rehabilitate. Yeah. But where it would get frustrating is I'd have the people that seemed to be more like functioning meth people. So the person that's clearly actively, you could see it on their body. You could just see that they were killing themselves with meth. But then I'd have other people that worked full-time jobs, got promoted, weren't missing work. They just like to dabble in meth every now and then.
just a little dabble here and there.
Yeah, and it would just drive me crazy, because they would give me negative tests. They would be always honest with me about using. But the officer just has to deal with that. We have to write to the court every time you give us a dirty test. We have to explain what we're doing in response as far as treatment. And it would just drag it out forever.
Huh. You know, I have a question. I heard that if a person under supervision gives a dirty test, that they can request to have a second test done, and the second test results need to be accepted. Is that true to your understanding?
No, not for federal. What can be done is, so generally, I think most departments are doing this. I could be wrong, so come at me if I am. But at least federally, we're taking what's called a presumptive drug test. That initial test hasn't gone through an actual lab. It'd be similar to you ordering a drug test kit from Walgreens, and it'd be a presumptive test. This actually drives me crazy on shows too, where they'll talk about drug testing, and Shameless, again, bringing up the show Shameless. The probation officer was like, don't eat poppy seeds. Well, poppy seeds will give you a presumptive false positive.
Yeah, you have to eat quite a few of them, though.
Yeah, but even if you did, it'll show up as an opiate. But if you run it through the lab, it's not what you metabolized.
I've done saliva drug test. I've done urinalysis drug test. I've done follicle drug test. I was under supervision from social workers through the CPS court, and also for other things. But I did drug testing continuously for 4 years.
Yeah.
I had to call a line every day, and if my color came up, I had to go. Rain or shine, doesn't matter, couldn't miss. And for the most part, I think the tests are relatively accurate. However, I have had false positives, knowing that I hadn't used.
So when you denied use, when you said, no, I did not use, they should have wanted then to double check that by sending it through the lab.
See, instead, they had offered a second test. And I gave the sample again, and it did come back negative.
Within how many days between the tests?
A couple hours later.
Oh, a couple hours later.
Without leaving the facility.
Oh.
Yeah, and I've also had where with a saliva test, it come back negative. The social workers say, you're clearly high.
Wow.
And I said, I'm upset. You know, I was furious. And they made me take 2 more in office to prove that it was negative.
And they came back
and
negative.
They still accused me of being under the influence.
Wow. That's not okay.
No.
That's not okay. Also, how often would you say you were tested in a week's time? Was it every week?
Almost every week.
Because what's supposed to happen, theoretically, right, is that you're initially testing quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And as the person is continuously showing negative tests, you start putting more time between the tests. Because we're trying to see if you can handle it. Can you sustain? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to make a person basically dependent on the testing. That the only reason why I'm not using is because I know I'm being tested so frequently.
Mm-hmm.
You have to then start widening that gap, testing every 2 weeks randomly, but every 2 weeks or twice a month, however you want to do it. And each time you come in and it's negative, well, we're going to make that gap even longer.
Yeah, I think I had a lot of discrimination against me, possibly because of my attitude. Even though I was willing to do the things, I felt that an injustice had been done to me and my family.
Yes.
So I was jaded.
You weren't deserving of it.
Yeah. And like I said, they would test me before I could see my children in office. And it was always negative. Always negative for 4 years. I mean, except for the false positive, which, I proved that it was a false positive. Even initially, my first drug test ever, I feel, was contaminated and switched. So CPS had showed up to my house, and they had requested to do a saliva test on myself and my ex at the time, which we agreed to. But I didn't let them in my home. Mm-hmm. So it's the CPS social worker and a police officer.
Wow.
And so I agreed to do the test. I think my boyfriend initially did the test himself, and then I went outside to do the test. Well, it's a saliva test. So you have to, how the test works is you have a swab, and you're supposed to puncture a seal on part of the test with the back of the swab. Mm-hmm. And then you swab your mouth and then stick it inside of the test.
Right.
Well, she's trying to break the seal, and it wouldn't break. And so she took out a writing pen out of her pocket, which she could have picked up God knows where, and broke the seal with her writing pen. And then she set the test in the dirt, told me to go back inside and wait for the results. When I came out, one test was negative and one test was positive. I wasn't using.
Was there any writing on it where, like at the edge of the stick? I've never done swab drug tests, but anything that would confirm that was your stick?
No.
Wow.
Yeah. And she told me to go back in the house and wait for the results, that they'd knock on the door when it was ready. And when I came out, she said one test was positive and one was negative, and mine was the positive one. I wasn't using that time. Wow. And that's what started my CPS case.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. What, do you mind telling me what drugs is your experience with drugs?
Oh, I enjoyed meth occasionally. Okay. Yeah. It did pose some problems in my life. It was never as big of an issue as the courts would have liked it to be.
As the courts assumed it to be.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how so we talked earlier about how officers in courts learn information about a person even using it all. And that's how they found out about you.
Well, actually, my friend, she was a meth user. She wasn't always, our friendship didn't begin because of meth. I've known her since childhood. She was a homeless individual, and she was pregnant. And she went into labor and went to the hospital and called me and told me that she had given birth. So I went to go visit her. I brought her Burger King and balloons and some clothes for the baby, and wanted to advocate for her that she and the baby could possibly go into program, that, if she wants a breast pump so she could pump out the toxic milk. And social services was angry with me.
Oh, wow.
And asked me to leave. So I left. Well, then I guess the hospital staff made a report that I brought her drugs to the hospital. And that's how CPS initially learned my name. It didn't have anything to do with my children.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a bizarre experience.
So the hospital claimed that you brought drugs.
Yeah.
And you didn't?
No, I brought Burger King and balloons.
And so they opened up a case based on that?
Yeah. My children weren't with me at the hospital. I didn't even know how they learned I had children. It's bizarre.
And so then from there, it should have just been an investigation, right?
Yeah.
And so from that investigation how did you get from an investigation to them doing swabs of.
I have no idea.
They just so that day she showed up with the police. They were forcing a swab from you.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. That was in violation of my rights. I know that now. But I was young and I was afraid and I had nothing to hide. Except for my boyfriend was a drug user.
It's actually quite scary, this story, because it's not like law enforcement. You commit a crime and you do get an attorney and you are on pretrial, you're aware of why, you have it. But for them to just show up with a law enforcement, I'm surprised they have that authority.
Yeah. Technically, I didn't have to submit to a drug test.
Right.
I knew I didn't have to let them in my home, but I didn't know that I felt that if I didn't submit to the drug test, that they would get a warrant.
You're scared.
Yeah, I was terrified and embarrassed. I'm out in the front yard, a nice neighborhood, and the neighbors are, see me doing a drug test in the front yard. It was horrifying.
Right. Well, so you got 2 drug tests. So believing you, then that means that your husband was the one that was dirty.
Yeah. Well, my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then throughout the course of my ordeal, they demanded that he and I dissolve the relationship if I wanted my children back.
That is quite the story.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that happened. Well, going back to people under supervision, you're right. Today, it is smarter to be honest with your officer. The games that you play are just going to get you into court faster. Not you, but I mean, people play. Those games look like failing to show up for a drug test, waiting 3 days, and then talk to your officer. The 3 days thing is because generally most of the drugs get out of your system after 3 days. So you skip the drug test.
Oh, yeah.
You act like your phone is broken. Then you say, Miss Officer, I'm so sorry I missed your call. Or if it's what you said, the dial-in thing, then you act like you must have forgotten to call. It's called no-shows. That can get you back into court as well.
Yeah, from my understanding, a no-show, they, at least in my experience, if you no-showed, they considered it a dirty test.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much us too, except that not so much a dirty test, but that it was a mark. It was a mark against you. We could bring you back to court for too many no-shows. Every no-show requires an officer to respond. We have to get you on the phone. We have to go drive to your home. So you're ruffling the PO feather. Right?
They're gonna
Because you're irritating us.
Come on, guy. Now I gotta do this and go across town
track
and
you down. I'm calling your mom. I'm trying to find out where you're at.
Calling your mama.
It actually would keep you away from court by just showing up and telling I'm telling the truth. I'm dirty. You've got to work the program. You've got to show that you're trying. You got to give them some negative tests.
Thank God that's an option now. Because users do need help.
Yeah, and we're trying. Officers have to show, at least on the federal level, we have to show the court everything we've tried to do. But when a person is not even trying, they're not showing up, or they're showing up and they're doing what's called a stall. They act like they can't pee. And they'll sit there all day, and they'll give you so little that we can't work with it. It'll be an all-day affair. If you just tell me the truth, tell your officer the truth, they'll work with you a little bit. It'll keep you out of custody a little longer. If you can't give any negative tests at all, you can't sustain for even a couple of weeks or a week to give a negative test, then you've got a serious problem.
Yeah.
You need help. And it's better to just acknowledge that and start working treatment or say, I need to go into residential. But of course, that's not what they do because they're in the throes of use.
People that use typically only stop when they're ready, regardless of the program, regardless of the outcome. They'll choose the drugs over life, death, and jail.
And it's really sad to watch. It's really, it's so easy to say, but you'll watch that they're doing this despite their family, despite the wife.
Yeah.
I'm like looking at the wife saying, I've conjured up an image in my head of this one woman. She was very supportive of her husband. She would know that he returned to use because he started cheating. Right around the corner was where he knew where he could get meth. And it was a girl that he used to date. And so she would know the moment he was having an affair, she knew he was using, and she'd call me. And really, she and I both worked with him, trying to get him straight, trying to get him clean. He would go into a program within a couple of days, he'd walk right out.
Yeah.
He'd walk right out. He wanted his drugs. But he was one of those guys I'm talking about. He worked a lot. I mean, he was like in construction. He worked early mornings, 6 days a week, home late at night, but could not lay off that meth. He was using almost every day.
That's incredible. And maintained his job.
Maintained his job. Never, not a late day. I mean, he was a pain for me because I had to catch him after his hours and on his one day off. Drove me crazy. But we kept working with him because he kept going into programs. You could see he wanted it. You could see that he loved his wife. He loved his children. But no matter what I said or his counselor said, he just couldn't get himself away from it. So people will ask me, we shouldn't be using the prison system for people who are using. And I challenge back, take the story I just told you, what would you like us to do then? What else is there to do? We had you in residential. Every time you went in, 2 days later you walk out. Nothing's working. No treatment plan is working. And you're continuing to use. And going back to that balance, an officer has to ask themselves, and the court, because we're reporting to the court, every time you use, every time you walk out of a program, we have to tell the court what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, there has to be consequences.
We've done electronic monitoring where we're trying to control their movements more, so he can't just go around the corner and get his meth. They always find a way, though. And at some point, there's just nothing left. And we have a duty to the community to stop a threat. And when treatment's not working, it's custody.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Defense counsel will say often in court, there's no point in putting him in custody. They can get drugs there too.
Yeah, that's a problem. I know somebody who's in prison as we speak that's battling addiction, has gotten into trouble with the drug dealers there and had to call and ask family members for money to get this drug dealer off their back because they're in danger now and trying to get clean from inside the prison.
Yeah. So I agree. I think it is still harder to get drugs than it is going right around the corner to get the meth, because I know that I have people that have sustained. They go to prison and they get clean. They sober up. We put them in 30 days, 60 days. They sober up. They're sober when we receive them. And then they go right into residential. And that can be very actually successful.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes they have to get sober to realize what's going on, what they're doing to themselves. And they're more ready to go into residential from a sober state than from a high. So to the people out there that say we shouldn't be using custody, I don't know what else to do.
There has to be consequences. There has to be.
Yeah.
The court systems, I think, have gotten a little soft on crime and punishment. But for drug use, it is a disease, it's an illness, so it's harder to punish it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, there has to be consequences.
I think that if you really want to take it off the table, if somehow that were to become a rule, that there's some law that says that if it's only about drug use, no more putting him in custody for any length of time, then you have to remove the risk that an officer feels that they're by ignoring it. Meaning, just tell the officer, don't worry about it. If they go and rob another bank, it's not on you.
Yeah.
And if during the course of that robbery somebody gets hurt, it's not on probation.
No.
Not on the courts.
Yep.
That's the only way I could see around it.
Yeah, and the whole United States is going to end up looking like downtown LA.
Right.
I don't know if any of you guys have seen downtown LA, but it is pretty bad.
It is pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
Now, the programs you were in, was it like outpatient programs, like group and individual?
I have done them all, I believe. I've done outpatient. I've done inpatient. I've done faith-based. I completed all of 3 of the programs. However, they just wanted me to keep doing more programs.
Even though you kept testing negative.
Yeah, and I completed.
Talk about, again, a waste of resources.
Yeah.
You were taking up a spot of somebody who really, really needed it.
Yeah, and I was in the, like I said, pretty much consecutively for 4 years I was in program. The final program was the residential. I had just decided that they were not happy with the own outpatient services that they sent me to. They weren't happy with the outcome, even though I completed the program. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go do inpatient.
Wow.
And they were happy with that. Pretty much. When I got out, they still wanted me to program some more.
Right.
But I actually got that excused. I didn't have to complete the 4th program.
By their own standards, that one test that got swapped was the only positive test?
And the false positive.
The false positive.
Yeah.
So that's it, though.
Yes.
That's a lot of programming for that.
Yes. Because like I said, they looked at my personality and the way I was presenting, and they assumed that I was under the influence of something. But
so if I would have known you back then, I would have told you need to calm down, get friendly. Remember, because we were talking about that in episode 1, and that we're talking about the way you present can affect that officer, because you're going to tap into those biases and their beliefs. And
they hated me.
Yeah.
I went through, I think, during the course of my experience, I believe I had 12 to 13 different social workers.
Wow.
And it was a continuous, the case never closed. And 4 years for a CPS case is a very long time.
Yes.
But I was not going to give up. And I wasn't going to let them close the case. So, yeah, and everybody knew who I was.
That's quite a story. The faith-based programs, my knowledge is they're always a year. Like Salvation Army, it's a year.
Well, so we have Salvation Army, and there's also, I think DARE is, mostly faith-based too. Faith-based.
Okay.
But there's also a program called Celebrate Recovery.
Okay.
I participated in that faith-based program, which a lot of churches run it. So it's not just, in Southern California, but throughout the country. So you can reach out to churches and ask them if they have a Celebrate Recovery program.
Okay.
However, that might not be accepted by your probation officer or social worker or the courts. It might not be recognized. So you need to check with your court and your attorney before signing up for that program.
I don't really recall that necessarily, unless the court specifically stated 6-month drug program. Maybe it's a time, but we didn't really care what program you were in, as long as it, had some counseling, some cognitive training, that sort of thing.
Well, a friend of mine is a graduate from Salvation Army. I believe she was there for 7 years. So she didn't have to do 1 year.
Right.
If she needed the help, she was able to stay.
Yeah.
And being in a program for 7 years is
it's a career.
Yeah.
It's a career.
She's still sober though.
Well, good for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go through county services as well. I didn't Google that to give as a referral.
Yeah, most states have the 311 line.
Oh.
And if you call 311, ask them to provide you some services, they will start the paperwork and everything necessary for any government agencies to assist with cost and help finding you a rehab.
Right. Now, you probably experienced this too, so I want to get this information out there for anyone that is listening and does have a problem and is looking for help. These programs, you have to be very persistent. You have to keep calling. Do you want to talk on that?
Yeah. So my friend, she had called me on a Valentine's Day morning begging for help.
Okay.
So I went to her right away and began the process of trying to get her into a rehab or mental health because she was in bad shape. Mm-hmm. After about a month of trying to get her into a program and not being able to, they had no openings. Mm-hmm. Not in mental health for her to go stay. The only resource that we were able to get for her was from mental health services, from the emergency department of the mental health facility, to get her started on some medications.
Okay.
So that was really, really challenging and scary, knowing that she needed an emergency intervention and help, and there was none available to her.
Yeah. In Riverside, they do like a 24-hour hold. You have to stay there for 24 hours, and they do an assessment.
Yeah, we went down to both facilities on County Farm Road.
Yeah. In Riverside, we're talking for all those people out there that are in a bunch of different states. We haven't mentioned it yet, but we are based out of Riverside, California. So when she says County Farm Road, she's talking Riverside, California.
Yep. So on County Farm Road, there's a bunch of different social work, courthouse, all kinds of things. The juvenile hall's right by there. So it's kind of this little cluster. And they have two different mental health facilities. They have the emergency, department and the hospital where you'd be admitted. And they also have like a halfway house kind of thing. Neither one of them could take her in.
Wow.
They wouldn't take her.
Yeah, that is, I know it's tough as officers too. That was a big struggle for us. The funding, lack of funding. We had a lack of resources. It was so frustrating to be federal. Think of that. Think of just the word federal.
Yeah.
And we had less services and programs that we offered that we paid for than county probation.
Wow.
And I just was embarrassed by it. This is embarrassing. How could we be federal? And I'm like sending them off to county resources because we don't have anything.
Yeah, that's a good thing about faith-based programs.
Yeah.
They usually have more openings.
Absolutely. But the problem with faith-based is a lot of people don't want to go to faith-based programs.
Yeah. They need to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Because if they want to get out of supervision and they need this certificate or this program done,
Right.
it goes back to just do it. You don't have to take the religious aspect. Take what you want from it, get your certificate, and move on.
I was telling people that all the time, to your point, for whatever your reasons are, whether it's because you really need to get clean or you're about to go to prison or you're getting yourself in a lot of trouble, whatever your reasoning is, but you could almost the next day get into a faith-based program. They hated that it was almost always a year's commitment, and or they weren't going to lose their job, they weren't going to be able to go work or whatever their reasons were. But I remember having this really young kid. It was so sad. The parents, we'll have another segment on parenting a person, an adult who's in the system, who's using drugs. But the parents were doing the best that they could. They had a very strict religion though, and because of the way he was living his life, they wouldn't let him live with them. But they would pick him up and take him to programs or counseling if, they would support him that way. He was a really young kid, like 18, 19 years old. And he just couldn't stop using. And he was angry with his parents because of the religious, they just had different views about religion. I was begging him to go into faith-based because what I said that when you're dealing with a program such as through the county or something, usually there's a waiting list. And in order to keep yourself on that waiting list, you have to keep calling, checking in so that they know that you really are interested, because there's so many people on these lists, they don't have time to track you down.
No.
So you need to be doing that due diligence. So imagine you're asking a user who's in heavy meth use or heroin use or whatever they're using, and also asking them to be, I'm sober and I don't want to have to call a program. I took 2 weeks to call my vet,
right?
Because I need to get food and tick medication. You're asking these meth users to stay on top of that. Make sure you call every 2 days. Yeah. That's ridiculous.
Meth users forget to brush their teeth for weeks. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just silly. Just really silly. And so I was begging this kid, please just we can get you in a faith-based program. He was on the streets, this 19-year-old. Yeah. It was cold and he's just on the streets. His parents wouldn't let him live with them. And the parents wouldn't give him money for a hotel. I don't blame them at all. But he was on the streets. And I'm trying to get him to do faith-based and he's not going to do it because of the religion. I go, just ignore that part. Yeah. Put the power up to whoever you want. Whatever they say, insert different name. Yeah. Just anything.
Yeah. Even in AA, you have to submit to a higher power. Right. That's one of the first steps. They don't say God. They say your God could be anything. Right. But so even in something is open and accepting of everyone as AA, there's still going to be some kind of spiritual aspect to it, no matter what kind of program you're in.
Right. All right, let's talk marijuana. So marijuana, when it was illegal, it was always illegal. It's still illegal federally. So on federal supervision, you're not allowed to use marijuana. I wish we would just stop testing for marijuana.
It seems absurd at this point.
Yeah, it's just annoying. Frankly, as an officer, it was just freaking annoying, especially when it got legal, because you'd walk into a house and everyone's clam baking. Like, the entire house reeks of heavy marijuana use. And I'm telling my guy he can't smoke it.
Yeah, it's a little silly. But then again, if you're under supervision, you are not in control of your own life. Right. There are things that you are required to do because you messed up. Right. And it's part of the consequences.
Yeah, I have a family member that would always want to debate with me about marijuana use because he's sure that one day the federal court is going, federal laws are going to change and allow marijuana to be legal. Probably. That's not going to surprise me. But he says, then what are you guys going to do? I said, well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Judges are just going to do what they do with alcohol. Mm-hmm. If they don't like alcohol, they put it in the conditions that say you can't drink alcohol, even if you don't have drug alcohol use history.
Yep.
They're going to do the same thing with marijuana and just say, well, you can't smoke marijuana.
Yeah. When I was under supervision, I wasn't allowed to drink alcohol.
Right.
Part of my DUI, I had to have a alcohol monitoring bracelet on.
Right.
And it seems absurd because it's legal. Like,
right.
How can you tell me I can't do something that's legal? Is everybody's attitude.
Right.
But then, I came to the realization that I screwed up, and right. I had to pay the piper. Right. I had to do what was required by law. Right.
Exactly. I remember. We'll close on the subject with another funny story. I thought it was funny. I think it's funny. So I'm at this guy's house, and I knew he had the ability to have a temper, but I normally was able to keep him calm, keep him mm-hmm. down. And I never was, physically afraid or worried. I never brought a partner. And I've mentioned before, I wasn't armed, so I didn't wear my vest. I was always dressed down, but he didn't scare me. And I don't really remember what he got upset about, but he had gotten upset about something. It must have been a positive drug test for marijuana, because that's the subject matter of why I think the story's funny. He's getting so angry, and I'm trying to explain everything we just talked about. You just can't. The court says you can't. You just can't. You're going to get yourself into trouble. Mm-hmm. And he's just arguing, and he's getting a little bit more up there. And I'm starting to think, maybe I should retreat. Maybe I need to get out of this house before he gets more irate. He says something, and I go, well, I can't. I raise my voice, and I put my arms up like, well, I can't smoke marijuana. So if I can't smoke marijuana, you don't get to smoke marijuana. It stopped him in his tracks, and he looks at me. He goes, you smoke marijuana? I go, no, I don't smoke marijuana because I get randomly drug tested through my work. So I don't smoke marijuana, so I don't get a positive drug test, and I don't lose my job.
That's hilarious.
I said, same with you. You can't either, for the same reasons, pretty much.
That reminds me. Okay, so remember before your retirement, you and I had made a deal.
Yeah.
Do you remember our deal?
I don't know. Do I want it on record? What was the deal?
The deal was that after you retired, you and I were both going to try some marijuana because I hadn't smoked marijuana since I was 18 years old.
Right.
And it's about the same for you.
Right.
And
we never did.
We didn't. We chickened out.
Well, I'll fully disclose here. I did try it. Won't say with who, but I did try it.
You cheated on me?
Maybe off mic, I'll tell you. I actually am sad to tell you that I hated it.
I hated it 18 years ago, or I don't know how long, when I was 18.
Uh-huh. So. Well, I liked it. My memory is in high school. I remember liking it.
That's funny.
I hated it. I hated immediately feeling that way, and I couldn't get it to go away, and I had to wait for it to go away.
Yeah, in my memory, that's what it does to me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, my body feels uncomfortable. I feel heavy. I
didn't like it. I felt paranoid. I felt...
That's what you get for cheating on me.
Yeah. I felt guilty, too, because of all the years that I was spouting don't use marijuana. I just felt like I was doing some really wrong stuff there.
That's funny.
I didn't like it, so nothing to worry about there. I'm not going to become a marijuana addict.
Yeah, and I just want to put this out there that I am 14 years clean.
Right.
I am not sober. I do enjoy the alcoholic beverage.
Right. Got that. I understand. Me too. I like my wine.
Me too.
But I'm going to leave it at that. I don't like the marijuana. All right. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to remind everybody again that if you do need help finding programs to get into, that 311 is a good resource.
All right. Well, next week, can you write directly to the court, and should you? Stay tuned. Well, we have lots to discuss, but we want to hear from you as well. If you have a story that you would like to share or a topic you would like to hear us cover, please email us at F as in Frank, A as in Apple, F as in Frank at felonsandfamilies.com. FAF@felonsandfamilies.com. If you like us, help us out by subscribing. You can hear us on all the ways that you can get a podcast, or you can go to our website, felonsandfamilies.com. I'm Jodie.
And I'm Kat.
And you're listening to Felons and Families.
Jodie and Kat are not lawyers, nor are they therapists. The conversations are based on work and life experiences. The information and advice provided are opinions only and should not replace the advice that can be obtained from a lawyer or licensed therapist.